of coming attractions. And I think you'll see an example of that. Well, I'll tie it in to some scripture. Again, we talk about these things each week: acceleration, convergence, logistics, and understanding that as we move through this, what I think is the end times, we're going to see things happening very quickly. I think this week was a little bit slower than some other weeks in that I think a lot of people were on vacation. You know, even the coming Antichrist, I guess, needs some time off. But whoever that is, I don't know who that is. But there's a lot of things that are going to be happening in the next couple weeks. And they're all converging. And I'll talk a little bit about logistics also, and then understanding, which is this verse in Daniel, these verses in Daniel chapter 12, where Daniel was sort of asking the question, what does all this stuff mean that I've been seeing? And he's told to seal up the book until the time of the end. And at the time of the end, many shall be purified and made white and tried, but the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. And then there's some parallel passage in Daniel chapter 11 where he talks about the fact that the wise will instruct many. And so we want to be part of that group of wise people. We want to be the wise guys so we can hopefully tell people what's going on. And so I think there's this feeling in the Bible prophecy community that, you know, we're seeing a lot of things that we just really haven't seen before, and things that maybe we didn't anticipate seeing before the Lord returned. But as I've said, what's going to happen in Bible prophecy in the world before the Lord returns? Well, at least everything you've seen so far, and probably a lot more, I think. By the way, just an update on my schedule. I think I'll be here next Sunday. And then the following weekend, I'm going to be in Texas. I'll be doing a conference with Hope for Our Times. Until He Comes conference, the Texas version. I did one down around San Diego a few weeks ago. I'll be with Tom Hughes and Bill Federer, and then I'm going to Olivier Melnick and Alex Newman and some others. So you can register for that at hopeforourtimes.com. There is a live stream. I don't know if there's a live registration or not. Just go to hopeforourtimes.com. You should be able to find that on the homepage and see what's going on. Again, this is sort of my view of this, how these seal things will unfold. There are a lot of people, there's a lot of discussion. And listen, these come from all different views of rapture timing and that type of thing. But they're futurist, premillennial people. And people are trying to figure it out. And so the question is, have the seals started to open yet? Did they start a long time ago? Are they yet to open? Certainly, I think they're part of the birth pangs that we're going to see. And I think they increase over the course of this last period of human history and peak at or near the time of Jesus' second coming, so that we're going to see little bits of it at first. You know, when, for example, in the fourth seal, it says that He's given power over a fourth of the earth to kill with the sword. I don't think that means He kills a fourth of the earth. He has the power, whoever that's referring to has the power to do that, but I don't know that it says that He exercises that, so I think we need to be careful about that. But I have good friends who disagree with that, and I love it when my friends are wrong because it makes me feel better about myself. So, but this will be an interesting thing as we watch this unfold. And I'll talk a little bit about Mark of the Beast and some AI technology. This has been a very interesting thing to watch. If you've ever been to Lahaina, it's this sort of idyllic little beach town. I think it population is about 13,000 on the west coast of Maui, one of the great, beautiful spots on the planet. But it's in an area, it's kind of interesting. Maui is in a dry spot. It gets about, on average, I hear about, this is based on a lot of reading this week about Maui and Lahaina, about 13 inches of rain a year. But you go literally 10 miles away as the crow flies, and you'll be at a spot that gets 300 inches of rain a year. So there's a lot of water on Maui, but Lahaina is dry. And one of the things we know is that dry places have a tendency to burn. So there's a lot of theories out there. The pictures that are coming out are just absolutely incredible. In the middle of Lahaina is this 150-year-old banyan tree. This is a picture of it. The horticultural experts that were talked to by this, I think this comes from the Honolulu Star Advertiser, they said that the tree's probably gone. They saw the trunk, it was smoldering around the trunk of the tree. It's very thin bark. But trees like this, they don't necessarily burn in a fire because they're full of water. But the houses are, that's why the houses literally almost exploded, particularly in Lahaina, where a lot of the houses were maybe 100 years old or more. That wood's been drying out for a very long time. You won't even be able to buy kindling as dry as the wood in your house because it's just been sitting there. It hasn't been watered. It had water running through it for a very, very long time. And that's sort of why it explodes. You can see here's a picture of the banyan tree behind this building. I've been there a few times myself. It's very impressive, but it's probably gone. And you can see the pictures, just the complete devastation of the waterfront there. People were jumping into the ocean to try to get away from the flames, even boats in the harbor because of the flying debris, the 80-mile-per-hour winds. And when that fire's coming through at 80 miles an hour, you're probably not going to outrun it. There are, I think the most recent death toll is 93. They expect that. Some people in Hawaii have communicated with me overnight saying that they expect that might rise to 500 to 1,000, and that many of them will be children who were home, out of school, and didn't really know what to do. And you can imagine, you can see how the cars have burned. If somebody was sitting in those cars, and I saw this lady at the airport, she was interviewed, she said, here's a picture of my rental car, and it was half melted. And she said, we just barely escaped with our lives. I saw people with burns on their arms. I mean, the fire came through very, very quickly. This is what Lahaina looked like before. You can see, again, the banyan tree there on the right. Here's a picture of it now. Close to 3,000 structures totally destroyed. This thing is not coming back anytime soon. I have a video here. Yeah, this is, just play this while I'm talking. So, and people are talking about, there's a lot of talk about how the response went. I've heard that there were no fire sirens, or they didn't use the tsunami sirens to warn anybody. And so there's a lot of questions, and there's going to be a lot of investigations and accusations and that type of thing made about whether the response was adequate or not. My own personal view is this is a fast-moving disaster, and I don't know that anything was going to stop it. I mean, but you can't outrace a fire that's moving at about 70, 80 miles an hour through town. Do you remember that derecho we had here a few years back? That was that storm that came through, and it was moving through at over 100 miles an hour. And I was over in Richmond, Indiana, and I literally was driving. I saw it coming, and Pam had warned me it was coming fast. So I literally was driving across I-70, I will admit, at 95 miles per hour, and it caught me. So when these storms come, you just can't get there quickly enough. So just total devastation, and you wonder. We see these prophecies about heat and that type of thing that are going to come in this last period of human history. And that's why I titled this a preview of coming attractions. Because what is this? What are the end times really going to look like when this happens on a larger scale? We see prophecies that, a third of the trees and vegetation is burned up in the world. Okay, this is just a little stretch of Hawaii coast that's burned up. So just a couple more clips here. I think that it should switch over to a helicopter view in just a moment. So just a massive tragedy. Pray for the people there. There's plenty of places you can go if you want to donate and help them out. But this is not supposed to happen in a place like this. You just don't think about it. I mean, I know friends who lived up in the mountains in California, and all of a sudden they had fires racing up the side of the hills there at 50 miles per hour. And you can't get away, and nobody can get there in time. Gas stations exploded. It was pretty brutal. Now, what is going to happen with this? So there's a lot of theories about this. You know, people caused it. It was directed energy weapons and that type of thing. And I don't want to go into that. I'm skeptical of that. I'm always able to be convinced. But it's a massive tragedy, and they're going to make use of it. Now, this did not come out after the Hawaii fire. This was the headline of the Evening Standard, front page of the Evening Standard on Tuesday, before the Maui fire occurred. And so what are they doing? It's now changing from global warming to global burning. And it's hot out there. There are places that are very hot. There are some places that are not as hot as they usually are. Phoenix has had, I think, over 110 degrees now for 5 or 6 weeks, and they've got another 3 weeks, I think, to go that they'll be having these high temperatures, and it affects you. And so here's this article in the Evening Standard, and they're talking about politicians will be judged on delivery of net zero strategy. Listen, the net zero strategy is insanity. They think that these wind farms and solar farms are going to provide power, but they don't provide a continuous base, what they call a continuous base load power that's necessary for an electric grid to operate. They only operate at best 20% of the time. What happens at night when everybody's home to charge all the electric cars and you're relying on solar and wind? Oh, well, we'll just do batteries. Oh, where are you going to get all the lithium for that? How many African countries are you going to destroy to get the lithium? Although they're discovering lithium, I think there's big finds in India and in Turkey and elsewhere, but you got to get that. There's a logistics aspect to it. You have to get that to market where you can put it into the batteries. And then what do you do when the batteries go bad? How do you dispose of them? I mean, this is about control. We know that this is about a control. This is about control under a coming beast system. We know that this is coming. This is what they're doing. And the whole thing it's insane. It won't work. It can't work. Now, a lot of people, I'm seeing more articles in the press like, I don't really think this is going to work, even from politicians. And they'll be, they'll have the little thumb screws put on them until they comply, or they'll be gone. But this is a big problem. This is from an article in the Al Ghad newspaper out of Jordan today about the heat dome that they're having in the Middle East right now. And it is hot. It is, I don't know how else to say this, it is unprecedented. For example, in the Gulf of Mexico and around Florida, they're finding ocean temperatures of 100 to 102 degrees. This has never been recorded before. It may have been that hot before, but it's never been recorded. I've been in that water when it's like 95 and it's like sitting in a hot tub in the Gulf of Mexico near Fort Myers. Now they're talking 100 or more degrees. In areas of the Persian Gulf around Iran, they've been measuring water temperature of 107, 108 degrees, the water. There were parts of Iran along the Persian Gulf this week that had heat indexes and you know what a heat index is. I mean, after that derecho, remember the heat index here went up to like 110 degrees because it was so like 95% humidity and 98 or 99 or 100 degrees. And we thought we were going to die. The heat index in Iran, parts of Iran this week, was 158 degrees. Now, listen, we can all explain it away. We can make all these things, but understand that in Revelation, in the passages talk about a heat that's coming. And it may be that the cycle of the sun is changing. And that's contributing to that. And what a lot of people, everybody says, oh, well, this person caused it or this thing caused it. But maybe it's the judgment of God. Because we know that God's judgment is coming on the world. And everybody says, oh, it wouldn't do that. Well, why not? I mean, look at what's going on in the world. So I think we need to see that. Now, at the same time that's happening, of course, heat domes like that have a huge impact on agriculture. The Euphrates has been historically low for the last year or so. It hasn't completely dried up, contrary to what some people have said, but it's low. They've discovered some structures in the Euphrates, and I don't know what they're from. I don't think anybody knows yet. So you see a lot of speculation about it. And part of it is because Turkey's been siphoning off all the water to fill these massive dams that they've built up in Turkey. The leader of Turkey, before Erdogan, had said, listen, you Arabs, go ahead. You drink your oil, we'll drink our water. And they control it. And so Turkey can cause a lot of havoc throughout the Middle East. And the delta there in the Persian Gulf and Iraq and everything is drying up, and it's causing a lot of economic problems. Now, the flip side of that is there seems to be a lot of rain elsewhere. China has had historically severe flooding over the last few years, including this year. But it appears this year, at least, now this is based, it's hard to get accurate information out of China, but at least based on what I've been able to determine, that flooding is occurring in agricultural regions of China. So is that going to have an impact on the world's food supply? Well, China doesn't really produce all of its own food anyway, and they're going to have to they have a lot of people. Now, their population, I think, is starting to decline, but they still have over 1 billion people. I think that's pretty safe to say. So the question is, what impact is this going to have on the world food supply? Here is this is what the UN panel said. This is from back in, I think, January or March, when the IPCC report came out. And it says, climate change is speeding towards catastrophe. The next decade is crucial, UN panel says. Now, I disagree with the UN panel on what's causing it. It may just be natural. It may be a change in the cycle of the sun. But I do think something is going on. There's just too many of these things that we hear about every week. And then this is an interesting article. I think this came from Time or Newsweek. What if democracy and climate mitigation are incompatible? And the answer is they are incompatible. And so what they're talking about is we may need to institute very strict controls on what people are able to do, eat, live, drive, go places. So then that brings in this whole specter of the 15-minute cities that we've heard about. And they're trying to change that. Somebody told me this morning that Cleveland wants to become a 15-minute city. And it's sort of like, imagine what the torture that is of being able to only live within 15 minutes and you're living in Cleveland. I mean, you're only allowed to go 15 minutes away. That's not very, I'm sorry, it's just not very attractive. Where are you going to go? Brecksville to get away? I mean, but this is a big problem. At the same time that's going on, China's now going into deflation. So a lot of the world is facing inflation. China's facing deflation. They're big in commercial real estate and residential real estate, and that market is collapsing. It's been collapsing over the last 2 years, and eventually all of these things catch up. As this editorial in the Times of London said the other day, a China in decline is even more dangerous. And that's been one of my contentions about the demographic decline that we see in Iran and all over the West, in Russia, Ukraine, Europe. Now the United States is having a declining birth rate. People are just not having babies. There was a report, and I think it was the New York Times this week or the Wall Street Journal said that a lot of major urban hospitals are closing their maternity wards because there's no babies. Why? Because in many respects, people have lost hope and they're just giving up and they're not having babies. And then we do this ridiculous stuff with birthing people or whatever the nonsense is. I don't know if I mentioned this. I ran into a person. I don't want to identify the person. I'm talking, the person's a plastic surgeon. So we talked a while and I said, can you explain the medical basis of this transgender insanity? And Pam was in earshot and he freaked out. This doctor, you can't talk about this. You can't talk about this in public. What? And by the way, I think he may have agreed with me on the basic premise behind it, that it's insanity. But go and read Brennan Showalter at Christian Post is doing an excellent job of talking about this. I've seen some interviews with him recently. And the description that he gave the other day in an interview that I heard was stomach churning as to what these operations are and what they do to people and what puberty blockers do to young children. And now they're talking about driving this down into kindergarten. There's a lot of school regulations that say, you know, we're gonna do this. There's some city in America where they're doing this, and they used to have a tool where parents could opt out. It might be Houston. And now they're saying, no, you can't opt out anymore. So the only option is get your kid out of the schools. Dr. Marie Grossman, who's a psychiatrist, who's written a book on this called, let's see, it's something... Lost in Transnation is the name of her book. You can get it at Amazon, and she has a form in there for parents to fill out and take to their schools if they're going to stay in the public schools. And her advice was, wherever you are, wherever you have your kids in school, you need to go get this form filled out if you're going to leave your kids in the public schools. It's everywhere. I've even been reading some documentation about, you know, they have these pictures of clearly men. They have beards, but they're chest feeding babies. And what they're doing is they're taking hormones to get themselves to excrete something through that body part, their breasts, to let the kid suck on. They don't even know what's in this stuff that's coming out. They've never tested it on kids. The medical establishment in our country seems to have lost its collective mind. It's insane. But what did you think the end times are going to look like? It's crazy. So there's a lot of things going on, too, with the food supply. There's major drought in parts of the United States. In wheat, I saw some pictures of... They had to tell you it was wheat that was growing in Kansas. It didn't look like anything. It looked like little twigs coming up out of the ground. And it was very sparse. That's going to affect things. India is the major rice producer in the world. And they have, at least the most recent articles I've read, they've enacted a ban on exporting rice from their country. Now, a lot of countries get 30, 40, up to 70% of the rice that they use, which is their main dietary staple, from India. Well, who's going to replace that rice when there's droughts and problems in a lot of other regions of the world? Again, here's the extreme weather in China. Then we have the war between Russia and Ukraine. There was a shift about a week or two ago in the way the mainstream media is covering this, saying, well, Ukraine's not going to win this. And I think that that's pretty clear. I think I've said that for a long time. I think they've been able to punch above their, what they would say, punch above their weight class because of some of the artificial intelligence things that they've been able to incorporate into their technology. But even this morning in the New York Times, there was a kind of a heart-wrenching article about a young Ukrainian guy who had gone to the front lines, and he was in a trench. He was in an area where he had led an offense, at least he was at the front. I think it was near Bakhmut. But then all the other Ukrainian troops around them withdrew, and they were stuck there in a trench for 5 days just expecting to get hit by a drone. And so there's a lot of drone back and forth. There's missiles, that type of thing. And Ukraine, like I said, I think they've done fairly well with the technology that they've developed and that's been given to them. And they've developed and they're making a lot of their own drones. But there's a limitation to that. Now, they have attacked this bridge in the Kerch Strait several times. Over here between Russia and the Crimean Peninsula. There's a bridge here, and it's been attacked. They blew up, and they had to remove for a number of months I think the rail bridge was down for a few months, and I think I read articles back in March that it was still down, but I think it's reopened. Then they attacked the bridge, the highway part of the bridge. And so what Russia did when the rail bridge was down, they had to use ferries and they had to use transports across the bridge. And that slowed things down for them resupplying their troops. And this is a major supply chain to the Crimean Peninsula. But now what has happened is, so they attacked the bridge a couple weeks ago. It opened pretty quickly. It messed up some of the bridge decking, but Russia repaired it pretty quickly. But I think in retaliation to that, Russia just has obliterated the Ukrainian grain exporting capability to the point where I don't think Ukraine's really going to be able to come back online as a grain exporting country for a generation, assuming we're still around here for a generation. And I may not be around here for a generation. I go to these conferences sometimes and I have to chuckle because I'm sort of like one of the senior statesmen on the speaker panel, which is kind of shows you how the world is messed up, I guess. So I don't know in my lifetime Ukraine comes back. And there's articles, Atlantic Council had a good article last year about the fact that Ukraine could feed the world. It could, properly managed. But it's not coming back. Things are locked up. But now what Ukraine is doing is they're sending drone boats over and attacking Russian ships on the Black Sea. And you don't have to sink every one. You just have to get a couple to blow up and damaged. And then that makes it impossible. Then the people that are doing the shipping, the commercial shippers are going to withdraw from the Black Sea. And then government-funded or supported shipping, they're going to wonder whether it's worth the cost. Because now what happens is the insurance rates go up to where it's cheaper you have to just evaluate it. It's cheaper to just replace the boat, if you can. But how do you replace the boat? This is the problem. This is the problem with natural gas supplies. So for example, Israel has nice supplies of natural gas. How do you get that to market? You got two ways. You can do a pipeline, which the U.S. has interfered with, or you can do liquefied natural gas. But you have to have a terminal converted, and when you convert it, then you have to have what? A ship to put it on. And new tanker orders for liquefied natural gas tankers are stacked up until like 2027. So if you order one now, you're not going to get it for at least 4 years. So what do you do in the meantime? That causes a lot of supply chain disruptions, and that's what we're seeing it. And here's an article on the Wall Street about Ukraine's sea drones are shifting the balance here in the Crimean Peninsula in the middle, the Kerch Strait Bridge there on the right, the Sea of Azov there on the right, and then the Black Sea. And it's getting to the point where it's almost impossible to get insurance for shipping in the Black Sea, whether it's oil or grain or anything else. Well, that causes food supply problems. Ukraine is one of the major agricultural producers, and Russia produces a lot of food stuff as well. And now everything's stacked up. And it's hard for Russia to get a lot of its oil out through the Black Sea to markets because they don't really have the pipeline capacity yet to get it to China. It has to go by boat. So this is, I guess what I'm trying to say is this is going to cause food, gas, oil, supply chain disruptions, price increases, and that type of thing. I just think that that's inevitable. So you need to prepare. This is an interesting editorial from the Arab News today. And I'm sure that the person who writes this is probably a Muslim. They write for the Arab News in Saudi Arabia. And the only thing this guy's missing is his horse. You understand what I'm saying? This is the effect of the Ukraine war. I find these editorial cartoons very interesting. Here's one for Mike Ramirez, sort of like, here's a tank, mean and green. Hey, does anyone have a battery charger? Did you see that? A Canadian guy who bought a Ford pickup truck. He said, this is the biggest scam ever. First of all, I had a little minor fender bender. It was in the shop for 6 months before it could get fixed because they couldn't get the parts for it. But now I go out and I try to take a 1,000-mile trip and I can't do it. And then I get to places like out in the middle of nowhere, Canada, when Pam and I drove across Canada on the Trans-Canada Highway, we saw Tesla and government battery charging stations, not everywhere, but every time there was a little settlement, there would be at least 2 battery charging stations, and by the way, they weren't busy. Now I'm told that they're not working. This guy says they're not even working. And who do you call? Nobody can tell you what they're doing. So now I've got this battery powered car out there, and how do I charge it? Well, I guess you go over to somebody's house and ask to plug in for a day because it takes a lot longer. So, and he said, by the way, I had to buy 2 fast chargers that I didn't know about when I bought the truck. And they're $10,000 each. I had to buy one for work and one for the house. So that's $20,000. Remember when you used to be able to buy a small fleet of cars for your whole family for $20,000? So things have changed. At the same time, all this is going on, everybody wants to go, we're going green, we're going green, we're going green, right? This is the article from Foreign Policy Today. Global oil demand catapults to record high. And so what are the Saudis doing? They're cutting back production. Why? Price goes up, less supply, price goes up, they get more money for all the projects that they have. And this is a reminder too, the Saudi royal family is the richest family on the planet. They probably control about $1.5 trillion of wealth. That gives them a lot of power and muscle financially. Now I want to make a comment about this. This is issue 1, which if you supported issue 1, you voted yes. That was going to make it harder to amend the state constitution with these voter initiatives. It failed. What was it? 60% voted no on issue 1 to 40% that voted yes. And what the pro-abortion people did was they made it about abortion. And so if this was a referendum on abortion, understand that in Ohio this fall there will be a referendum to expand abortion availability in Ohio on the November ballot. That's almost certain. The question is that, now I'm against that. That should be obvious. if you've been listening to me for a while. But the practical thing is that going to alter the election landscape in Ohio if a lot of people support abortion? And remember, for 50 years, abortion rights increased to where they were almost unrestricted. It was hard to put in any restrictions. And this failed. So now we have a problem. In Illinois, they put in a statute that essentially, they called it Deceptive Practices Act. And what they said was, and it was clearly that the purpose of this statute was to target pregnancy crisis centers where people would go, they don't get an abortion, and people try to talk them out of it. They give them education about what's actually growing inside of you. And so Illinois decided they enacted legislation that said, you can't do that. That's a deceptive practice. So it went to a federal judge in Rockford, Illinois. I believe he was appointed by President Trump, and this is why these elections are important. He blocked the law. He said this law is vague, and he used the term, it's vague and stupid. So praise the Lord for that judge. Now they'll probably appeal that, but the state says, well, we're going to fight it. We're going to fight it. And so this costs a lot of time and money. So this is the AI portion. So I'm going to talk about AI portion, then I'm going to pivot over to the Middle East. I've mentioned this over the last few months. It really had its official rollout about 2 weeks ago, which is WorldCoin. WorldCoin was founded by Sam Altman. He's the guy behind OpenAI. He founded OpenAI with Elon Musk. Elon didn't like the way that it was going, so he went off. He thought it was being too commercialized. So now he started his own commercial company, of course, to develop artificial intelligence products. Altman has now moved into this thing called WorldCoin. He's not the CEO of it, but he's the founder. And what it is this orb that you look into. They'll give you $50 to look into the orb, take an iris print, and then that's put into a database. All the while they're saying, oh, but you will be perfectly protected on your privacy rights if you do this. Really? How many of you, if you believe that, I've got a bridge, in Ukraine that I can sell you that's not finished or not working right, or may not be working. I think it is working, but you get the point. But as the MIT Technology Review said, it's already being investigated. In emails, Eileen, this is from MIT Review, recently exchanged with WorldCoin, a spokesperson who was vague about how the company was handling personal data. I thought they were protecting it. Now they're vague and they can't even really answer the questions, saying that, quote, the WorldCoin Foundation complies with all laws and regulations governing the processing of personal data in the markets where WorldCoin is available, including the General Data Protection Regulation. The project will continue to cooperate with governing bodies on requests for more information about its privacy and data protection practices. Like they're really protecting all of our data now, right? They're not protecting our data. And this is part, I think, of the beast system that's coming. Here's a thing on deep learning. This is part of what's happening in the artificial intelligence space. And everybody says, oh, it's dangerous. We need to roll. But listen, we're at a place where it's more dangerous in terms of an arms race than I think the nuclear development was back in World War II. I think it's that serious. This is, I was thinking of doing a talk on this in Texas. I'm not sure if I will, but I was going to call it essentially existential, because it is essentially an existential issue for humanity, how this is going. And I think it's got end time stuff written all over it. But here is a deep learning model can steal data by listening to keystrokes with 95% accuracy. So all those things that somebody can hack through your phone, computer, or those, I don't think we have it like Alexas or whatever, that are listening devices in your house now. And I told you I was in the doctor's office discussing a condition, And as she was writing on the chart, I looked at my Facebook, and the medical condition I had talked to her about, there were ads on how to treat or deal with the condition on my Facebook phone. It happens all the time, doesn't it? You go to the store, you don't even turn your phone on. It's in your pocket, and you walk around. Like, I look at golf stuff. You may find that hard to believe, but I looked at some putters, and what do? I get putter ads all the time. And I'm sure none of them will work exactly correctly. So give me the right one and I'll buy it. But there's not much privacy. This was one, I don't know if I mentioned this or not. This is from January from Petapixel. Wi-Fi can now see people. Tech could one day replace cameras. What they did was they took data from a person's house that had cameras in part of the house. And then they also took data from the Wi-Fi signals in the house. They were then able to devise a way to read the Wi-Fi signals to determine where the people are in the house at any time. Then they took the cameras out, and they can now look at your house through Wi-Fi, if they can get access to it, and determine where anybody is in the house at any time. Privacy is a large illusion. This was a World Economic Forum thing, the social implications of the metaverse. And you can get that. It was just published in July, and it's about a 42-page thing talking about all the great things that are going to be able to do with artificial intelligence, social implications, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that's coming. It's already here. I don't know how much that's going on that we don't know about. I know that Meta Facebook out here in New Albany, one of the big buildings that they're building, I don't know if it's open yet. They were building it a few months ago. Last time I was out by there, is going to be completely devoted to artificial intelligence. And so Facebook has spent about $2 billion there. Google's spending about $4 billion right across the street building server farms. So as one of my friends, I showed him some of the pictures of things that are going on out there. I took them as I was driving by one day, and he said, that is the mind of the beast. Because there are these server farms in a number of locations, a couple dozen locations around the world for Google, and they're getting data. Now, I want to talk about technocracy for just a moment. I would highly recommend that you go and get a book and follow Technocracy News. It's published by Patrick Wood. He's been here to church. He was here at church, 4 or 5 years ago probably, and did a weekend conference where he talked about technocracy. And I think Patrick is a little skeptical as to how quickly this stuff was going to come. And I saw an interview with him recently, and he said, this stuff really came up even more quickly than I thought. And now with artificial intelligence, it's coming even more quickly than that. So this week on Hope for Our Times, Tom Hughes interviewed Patrick on Monday, and then I was on the show on Tuesday. And then Wednesday night or Thursday morning, I got some messages from people, and Patrick had a stroke this week, so you would please keep him in prayer. He'd had bypass surgery back in April, and he was just coming back and starting to do his show again and do some interviews. In fact, I think the interview with Tom may have been the first one that he did in his comeback, but now I don't know the details of the stroke, just that it was, at least from what I've heard, it was serious. So please pray for him. He is a treasure. He's very intelligent, and he has a book out called The Evil Twins of Technocracy and Transhumanism, and they're inextricably woven. Now, I will disagree with Patrick a little bit, and I'll tell you why in just a moment. But this is the definition of technocracy that he uses. And he says technocracy is not political, it's an economic system. And I agree with that to a point, but I also think that there's a religious aspect to it. These people believe that they will build the equivalent, I don't know how else to say it, the kingdom of God on planet Earth. That's what they think they're going to be able to do. So there's a religious component to this. So here's the definition that Patrick uses. Technocracy is the science of social engineering. By the way, this was developed at Columbia University back in the 1930s. This is sort of how they looked at it. And we know all these people came out of Columbia University, guys like Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was a national security advisor. So Columbia has been sort of pivotal in the development of this. Technocracy is the science of social engineering, the scientific operation of the entire social mechanism to produce and distribute goods and services to the entire population of this continent. Now, they were limiting it to the North American continent, but of course they've expanded it. For the first time in human history, it will be done as a scientific, technical engineering problem. There will be no place for politics or politicians, finance or financiers, rackets or racketeers. Technology states that this method of operating the social mechanism of the North American continent is now mandatory because we have passed from a state of actual scarcity into the present status of potential abundance, in which we are now held to an artificial scarcity forced upon us in order to continue a price system which can distribute goods only by means of medium or exchange. So they want to control everything. That's the point. And they've been working at this now for almost 100 years. Actually, over 100 years. And you can read stuff about the Dulles brothers, John Foster Dulles and his brother, the guy who's one of them, Dulles Airport in D.C. is named after them, Secretary of State under the FDR administration involved in the government. But they believe that eventually technocrats and science are going to be able to control everything, and they were going to control the production and distribution of everything. Now, put on top of that now all of this stuff that we have with the social control mechanisms of media propaganda, technology, social credit systems, digital central bank digital currencies. And they may bypass the local banks. Local banks, I think, are going to have some problems this year. I just saw that there was a couple buildings, office buildings in San Francisco that sold this week. One went for 20% of what it was asking for, asking price a year ago. These are big office buildings. Another one went for about 40%. And the article was sort of mocking the person who paid 40%, like, why did you pay that much? Because if you waited just a little while longer, they might have just given you the keys. Westfield had a big mall in San Francisco on Market Street. They turned the keys back to the lender. They just walked away from it. San Francisco Center on Market Street. In fact, there's a video out there, if you can look it up, a guy walking down Market Street. Now, if you've been to San Francisco Market Street, they've got the light rail that goes down the middle. There's office buildings, shops, stores. I'm telling you, that guy walked a mile down Market Street, and I would say 97% of every storefront, every office was empty. San Francisco is over. You have to be a blind optimist to think that it's coming back anytime soon. And one of the guys who bought the building says, well, I think people will come back. Everything is going to turn around and people are going to come back to San Francisco. They'll start commuting to their jobs again. Not in San Francisco. They might be commuting in Texas or Oklahoma or Arkansas, but they're not coming back to San Francisco. Look at what's going on in the street. This is shocking, but understand. So here what this technocracy definition says, only by abandoning the interfering price control and substituting a scientific method of production and distribution can an abundance be achieved. Technocracy will distribute by means of a certificate of distribution available to every citizen from birth to death. This is almost 100 years ago they were saying this. From every citizen from birth to death. That pretty much covers your whole life, right? That's their goal. The technate will encompass the entire American continent from Panama to the North Pole because the natural resources and the natural boundary of this area make it an independent, self-sustaining geographical unit. Well, if they're going to do that in North America, you think, oh, well, they won't do that in the Middle East or Africa or anywhere else. This seems to be being set up for a global system, but it's religious. I want to remind you of this talk that Yuval Harari gave. I've played this many times, but I think you need to remember that there's a religious aspect to this. He's at Google headquarters, Silicon Valley, California, in 2015, and he says this.
It's a pleasure to be here also, not only to visit Ran and Ariel, but also to be in Silicon Valley, which for me is a kind of special place as a historian. As a historian, I focus mainly on the history of ideas, ideology, mythology, religion, and I think that the most interesting place in the world today, in religious terms, is Silicon Valley. Not the Middle East, not Syria or Afghanistan or Israel or Jerusalem, but Silicon Valley. This is where the new religions that will take over the world are being formulated. It's not an electronic algorithm, but what's the difference?
So this leads to this, where I'm sort of tying this into the logistics aspect of what I talk about each week. So listen to this passage from Revelation 13 and what is going to happen in this coming last period of human history. Some people call it the 70th week. Some people call the tribulation period. So, but we all know what we're all talking about, the same thing. So listen to this. This is from Revelation chapter 13. And by the way, I'm going to use a translation that I had not known about until yesterday, the Legacy Standard Bible. I was developed out at Master's Seminary. It's sort of based on the New American Standard Bible, which I think is the best translation in terms of getting the verb tenses right in Greek and Hebrew. But I know there's people that, I get a lot of corrective emails about using any other translation. So I'm going to tell you up front, you can compare it to the others. You're going to find that it's pretty much the same, but I really do think they've done a great job of pulling out the verb tenses and that type of thing in terms of what the original author wrote. And I think that was one of their guiding principles. Was it said that a lot of Bibles seem to be more audience-centered than author-centered. And maybe it needs to be author-centered because it's authored by God, and that's important. So in verse 7 of Revelation 13, it says this, "And it was also given to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them, and authority over every tribe and people and tongue and nation was given to him. And all who dwell on the earth will worship him, everyone whose name has not been written up from the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who has been slain. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. If anyone is destined for captivity, to captivity he goes. If anyone kills with the sword he must be killed. Here is the perseverance and faith of the saints. Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had two horns like a lamb, and he was speaking as a dragon, and he exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence. And he makes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, whose fatal wound was healed. And he does great signs, so that he even makes fire come down out of heaven to the earth in the presence of men." And the question is, how does he do that? Is it supernatural? Is it some kind of technology that he's able to control? Doesn't really say. And he deceives those who dwell on the earth because of the signs which were given to him to do in the presence of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who had the wound of the sword and has come to life. And it was given to him to give breath to the image of the beast. This sounds a little bit like some of the stuff we see going on with artificial intelligence now. And I don't really think a century ago this really made sense, because it wasn't time yet. Remember, Daniel's told, seal up the book till the time, and then people will understand and be able to instruct many. And I really think we're at that time. Time will tell whether I'm right or not. And it was given him to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast would even speak and cause as many as do not worship the image of the beast to be killed. So there are consequences. And he causes all the small and the great, and the rich and the poor, and the free men and the slaves, that they be given a mark on their right hand or on their forehead, and that no one will be able to buy, to sell, except the one who has the mark of the mark, either the name of the beast or the number of his name. So listen, how does this come about? We don't have the details about how this actually works out. But let me give you my thinking on it. My thinking is this. Now, we know that this appears to come after the abomination of desolation spoken of by Jesus, confirming that Daniel had spoke about it, that it's a future coming event. And this comes about at or after that time. I personally think it happens in very short order. It has to. So I don't think that the abomination of desolation takes place. You know, the standing in the holy place and make the abomination that makes desolate. I don't think that happens. And then the Antichrist, the first beast and the second beast, the false prophet, get together and say, you know, it would be a good idea if we devised a system that would be able to control how people buy and sell. We could really control everybody then and make them worship the first beast. Why don't we get some of the technocrats in here and figure out how this is going to be done? I think when it comes about, it's all ready to go. It's in place. It's been tested out. Various aspects of it have been tested out. We've seen this over the last few years, and they just flip the switch. And so they will use the technology in place, the technology that's being developed, the technology that's being rolled out, and I think it will come about very, very quickly. By the way, this is an article on Israel Hayom, either today or Friday, talking about in Israel. Do you see the symbols on the board? They're having the same issue in the schools in Israel that we're having here. And I can tell you that religious people in Israel are really freaking out about this. Now, I had posted an article earlier this week about the fact that, so now I'm going to turn to Israel, talk a little bit about Israel and some of the things going on there. And I'm sure I'll be following up more on this. But earlier this week, the IDF came out with a report. I posted it on my Facebook page. I don't know if I posted it on my Twitter account or not. But essentially, it was an IDF report. And the IDF report said, we have a problem. We have a problem in the north. Hezbollah is acting up. Iranian proxies are acting up along the Syrian and Lebanese borders. We may have to do something, and we're not sure that we're totally ready to go. I think that's a fair assessment of the report. Now, excuse me, Israel Hayom did not publish the report, so you can only go based on what Israel Hayom decided to publish about the report. So I think I'm just going to assume that they were fair, but this has been a big concern of people in the defense establishment, security establishment in Israel, that we be ready to go. And how quickly we'll be able to pivot to full battle readiness, because a lot of Israel has relied on reserves, and the reserves have a 48 to 72 hour call-up window. I mean, Israel's not that big. You can get anywhere, if you're in the middle of the country, you can get all the way to the north in 4 hours. I mean, you can get all the way to the south in about the same period of time. So it's not a very big country, but it takes time to get everybody there, get them uniform, supplies, and all that type of thing. So in response to that, the defense minister, Gallant, came out this week and he said, listen, if this happens, Hezbollah, you need to know, Iran, when they talk to Hezbollah, they're talking to Iran, because Iran is the one that funds Hezbollah. And he says, you need to know that if this happens, we will bomb Lebanon back to the Stone Age. Now, Lebanon's already a mess. For example, they had a kind of a strange underground fire in an area of Beirut that burned for a couple weeks. And it may still be burning, I don't know. They said it started in it's usually a potato chip factory or a garment factory or something like that. That's what the Iranians always say when something blows up. But there's concern because in the videos that you would see, you can find them on Telegram and elsewhere, of this burning, all of a sudden one of the main Hezbollah guys shows up to deal with the fire. And so the Alma Israel had done a report a number of years ago where they sort of identified this particular area as a place where there was probably an underground Hezbollah bomb or missile-making facility. And so the Alma says, maybe this is what caught on fire. And it burned for a while. And they're ready. But this has been the position of the Israeli Defense Force and the Israeli Air Force for a long time. Here's a video from 6 years ago at the Herzliya conference of the then head of the Israeli Air Force talking about what happens if we have to go into Lebanon. Now, this will be translated, so it's not the best. It's a little bit herky-jerky because it's translated on the part. But listen to what he had to say back in 2017 as to what they were going to do in the event they had to go into Lebanon.
The next parameter is quantity, scope. This has meaning. How productive can we be at a certain point of time? On 2 levels, on 3 levels. We are on a journey 4-5 years down the line in which we have taken our capabilities, and I'm saying quantitatively speaking, and have doubled them or actually quadrupled them. Meaning, only quantitatively, aside from the quality I talked about before, what we have been able to do in quantity in the Second Lebanon War, just in terms of quantity, we can do it between 48 and 60 hours. And now double the quantity with the quality that I talked about before. It is power that is not linear in its development and evolvement. It is actually a step function, and that's the first 2 parameters. The third parameter is the ability to create or generate action that has components, as I've said, qualitative and quantitative, that are very large, but it has other factors that will surprise our rivals in ways that they cannot even perceive or conceive, and we're working on that quite a lot. And what I said before about the campaign between wars, we also have the opportunity to check ourselves.
And so what he essentially said also in the speech back in 2017 was, listen, we're going to do in 24 to 72 hours what it took us 6 weeks to do. And it will be shock and awe like the people that are opposing us have never seen. Now, that's going to cause problems. The IDF report said there could be hundreds of casualties among the Israeli civilian population in the north and elsewhere as these missiles are unleashed because they've put in a lot of fire. So understand Israel's ready and they know that this is coming. Jonathan Spire has a very good article in Friday's Jerusalem Post. And he says, is Israel willing to strike at the full fabric of the Iranian effort to destabilize the north? And I need to pull that up. Give me 1 second here. By the way, you can pray that somebody will be able to heal my one email account. It's completely messed up. Pam will tell you that this is always a problem. And of course, now I'm not seeing it in my... Oh, that's why, because I'm looking at the wrong account. It works on my phone. It works everywhere else, but it doesn't work on my computer, which is a problem. It works online, but it doesn't work in Outlook, which I like. So here is a report. This is Jonathan Spires' article. Just listen to a couple things he said. Is Israel willing to strike Iranian effort to destabilize the North? An analysis. And he talks about recent Israeli strikes that have killed soldiers. They've made attacks over the last year that have killed maybe as many as 90 people. These are Iranians or Syrians. And there's really not a retaliatory response, at least that we know about. And there were some attacks just within the last 24 hours in Syria as well. And of course, nobody takes any credit for them for a while. So it says, this is the latest as part of an apparent increased tempo. This is the 22nd attack over the last year that we've done, 89 killed. And we do this all the time. So he says this, yet there is room for asking whether the situation is really as optimal as is often presented. Specifically, the question, of course, now I'm in the wrong browser, so it's opening all the ads. Good grief. By the way, if you're a webmaster and you're popping up ads all the time, I don't like you. Hang on a second here. I'm going to have to copy this into a different browser. Okay, so he says, there's room for asking whether the situation is really as optimal as often presented. Specifically, the question is whether the war between wars is addressing the totality of the Iranian project to Israel's north, or whether as a result of the undoubted success in one particular area, the targeting of air power occasionally by artillery, based on the successful intelligence gathering of specific Iranian static or moving targets in Syria, Israel has allowed itself to be channeled into only focusing on that area. In other words, what about Iranian activities like in Yemen and elsewhere? And this is all part of a peace. Unfortunately, despite Israel's ongoing air campaign, a considerable body of evidence exists in support of this perception that it's not enough. This emerging picture is one in which Iran is operating its various proxies in Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon as a single structure, without excessive reference to formal state borders. Israel, meanwhile, because of political and military constraints, is attacking only a limited number of elements within this structure. And so the question is, what are they going to do? And will Israel, do they have the capabilities? Even the Atlantic Council came out this week, or recently, and had a report that Hezbollah and Iran have opened a fourth battlefront inside Israel. So a lot of what you see going on in Jenin and Nablus and the terror attacks within Israel are being funded by Iran. And what did the U.S. do this week? We entered into an agreement with Iran under which Iran is going to get at least $6 billion. Now, the Biden administration, and I think this is the area where it really should be called the Biden administration, because this was the project of Barack Obama, to build up Iran at the expense of everybody else in the Middle East. He hated the Saudis. He liked the Iranians. And we could go into a whole thing about what I think. And there's been some recent revelations in a biography of His Highness, Barack Obama, that are pretty shocking. This guy is a total, complete fake and fraud. And I think that's pretty obvious if you have been paying attention. He started it in June of 2009 when he went to Egypt and gave that ridiculous speech. We've played it here many times. Go back and listen to it. It probably was the catalyst for the Arab Spring. And then he used whatever means he could to kind of build up the Iranians in Syria. Gave them, what was it, $150 billion under that agreement that they entered into, the agreement in 2015 that he structured so it didn't have to be approved by the Senate. That's a total, complete unconstitutional act. And I think he's sort of pulling the strings here. That's why I call it the Biden administration. So now Hezbollah and Iran, they just march forward. Now they've got $6 billion more all of a sudden. Oh, it's for humanitarian things. Okay, so you spend it on the humanitarian things, and that frees up the money you were going to spend on the humanitarian things so you can spend it. Where do you think they're going to spend it? I mean, how stupid do they think we are? Well, the answer is they think you're pretty stupid. That should be obvious. Now, the Wall Street Journal had an article this week that the other thing that all of a sudden the Biden administration is coming in and they want to achieve normalization between Saudi and Israel. Why are they doing that? The Financial Times, Biden keeps up push for closer financial ties. So Tony Badran, who is with the Foundation for Defense of Democracy, you can get this at tabletmag.com, and it's called "The New Saudi State Sets Off into Uncharted Geopolitical Waters." This was written a couple months ago. I think it came out in May. And he talks about what are the Saudis doing? Mohammed bin Salman's pushing for this. He was persona non grata. He was a pariah to the Biden administration. Now, all of a sudden, they're trying to normalize everything. So there's a lot going on in the Israel, Saudi, Middle East space right now, just within this week. So the Wall Street Journal comes out with an article on Tuesday or Wednesday, and they say there's trying to be this normalization. So I went back and I sort of researched some of the other things that have been going on. So Badran came out with this article back in May, and he actually, I think he went, at least he said, people from Tablet magazine went to Saudi Arabia and they talked to people about what was going on, there. And so look at a couple quotes from this article that I think are important. Perhaps the most realistic answer I received in the kingdom, that's in Saudi Arabia, to questions about the likelihood of any formal Saudi-Israel alliance was that while contacts and cooperation with Israel will continue, and they've been going on for a while, it's perhaps best that they remain short on official agreement for now. The response, while not reflecting any official position, had a ring of truth to it. After all, what would be the point of an American-powered sponsored deal with Israel if the United States continues to realign with Iran and is preemptively broadcasting its acceptance of Iran having nukes so long as they are not fielded? Good point. Unless Israel demonstrates the independent ability and will to wipe out the Iranian nuclear threat. Now think of what the defense minister of Israel just said the other day. Then it is simply an extension of U.S. regional policy, which officially tolerates and even facilitates Iran's nuclear program. Israel cannot deliver for Saudi Arabia what it wants from America when Washington is set on realignment with Iran. And how will the rationalist analysis about Chinese behavior stand up if Iran does get the bomb? My interlocutors had no clear answer other than to acknowledge this eventuality as the elephant in the room, or to fall back on well-known official positions that all bets would then be off and that the kingdom would acquire its own nuclear program. And part of this normalization that Saudi Arabia is working out is we will go in and help them build a nuclear program. And we'll fund it, we'll be guarantees of it. Ultimately, the Saudis' deepest geopolitical wish is for a time machine that brings back an America that no longer exists to run the region through its traditional allies in the pursuit of same goals like power, profit, and stability. This feeling is expressed with the bitterness of a scorned wife who, after decades of marriage, sees her husband throw away their hard-earned savings for an infatuation with a floozy psycho, leaving her with the children. And the floozy psycho is Iran. And he talks about the fact throughout this article, you really should go read this. It's very well done, is that it was the former president, not Trump, but the one before that really wanted to change this Iran thing. So this has, from our perspective of end times analysis and looking at things from a geopolitical standpoint, this does have sort of this end times thing written all over it that's going on right now as we speak. Now, the other thing that just happened within the last 48 hours, now MBS was interviewed, this is in Israel Hayom this week, and in this article, excuse me, I'm having a bad day, as you can see. I'm not ill, but I'm getting over something, and as you know, that's sort of how I manifest things. But MBS said, listen, he's in no hurry, he had said in an interview just this week, I'm really in no hurry to make this deal with Israel as long as Israel won't accept a Palestinian state. Now, I don't know if he's just doing that for posturing, because his father is still alive, and his father is big on a Palestinian state. If that is ever going to change, and this proposal that was floated a year ago, the Jordanian option, the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, whatever you call it, if that's going to be how this thing works out, it's not going to happen until the king passes away. I can almost guarantee that. And so you see that this is continually pushed. This is also in Israel Hayom. It says, this is an op-ed, Iran could be an obstacle on the way to a Saudi agreement. The tight timetable for the U.S. elections plays in favor of the Israeli interests vis-a-vis Saudi Arabia. The refusal of the Americans to work with Smotrich, that's the finance minister in Israel, harms their interests vis-a-vis the Palestinians. And it's a wake-up call for Netanyahu. There's a lot of things going on. There's a whole bunch of moving pieces. And this article, for the Americans, normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia is a process that will not only change the face of the Middle East, but will reposition the position of the U.S. in the region and push back Chinese influence. That's what people think is going on. It's going to be a very difficult thing. But then just within the last day, the Saudis appointed an ambassador to Palestine. Now, by the way, they're having a meeting in New York in a few weeks, about a month, where all, that usual parade of all the bad people are coming. And if you've ever been in New York around that time, it's impossible to find a place to park because these diplomats park all over the place. But they had a meeting in Jordan with King Abdullah, Mahmoud Abbas, and a representative of the Saudi government, and said that they were appointing an ambassador to Palestine. Now, that can't be done right now unless Israel agrees. So this may be an indication that the Saudis think Israel's going to agree to this, and they've termed that this is a non-resident ambassador. So he's not going to Ramallah yet. If he goes to Ramallah, it's only going to be with the approval of Israel. So you need to watch what's going on. And this is Al-Quds newspaper this morning showing that, this is, the Palestinians are viewing this as kind of a big deal. Now, while this is going on, Iran is announcing Israeli Air Force would not be the same. There's a push within Israel because of judicial reform. This is Peter Lerner. I think he was a lieutenant colonel in the Israeli Defense Forces. He was a spokesperson for them. And he's totally anti-Netanyahu, anti-judicial reform. He's just really, really against this. So what's happening is he published on his Twitter this letter signed by, I think, 169 or 70 Israeli Air Force, I think they're Israeli Air Force Reserve officers. These would be pilots who said, if you continue with this judicial reform and the Supreme Court strikes it down and you refuse to go along with it, we will not serve. We're out of here. When all of this stuff is going on with the problems in the North, you need to understand how I think this is fairly serious. front page of Cayenne International from Iran today. Israeli Air Force would not be the same. That's what the Israeli defense or Israeli Air Force chief said. Netanyahu came out and he had scorn for the U.S.-Iran deal. He was interviewed on Bloomberg, and I'm
Prime
not
Minister,
going
thank you so much for speaking to Bloomberg. Now, you've said...
I will summarize this. You can go just type in Bloomberg Netanyahu, and you can get the whole 19-minute interview. And one of the questions she asked him is, well, what are you doing with judicial reform? Are you going to compromise? He says, we tried to compromise. No, they wouldn't compromise. They wouldn't talk. So we went ahead. I don't think it's a big deal. I don't think it's going to be the end of democracy. I think that's overstated by the people that are opposing us. There's other things that we may dial back, we may not go through with. There's a judicial selection committee adjustment, and there's just a complete division in Israeli society over this. And even people who I know that are very pro-Israel and that type of thing, they're just like, Netanyahu is not very popular. Let's put it that way. He he's been around for a long time. Anytime a politician is around 20, 25 years, he kind of wears out his welcome. I mean, that happens. Ronald Reagan would have worn out his welcome, I'm sure. Some people, it takes longer, but he hasn't done a very good job of bringing people up through his party to replace him. Whenever they kind of get popular, they're gone. But he says, listen, when he was asked directly, will you go along with the Israeli Supreme Court if they strike down as unreasonable this reform, the reform that passed the Knesset, and I don't know if it's law yet or will become law, will take away the Supreme Court's ability to use a reasonableness test on basic laws. Those are what the Supreme Court has termed as essentially the Constitution of Israel, but they don't really have a constitution. And the reasonable test is very subject to interpretation. And so when he's asked, will you follow the Supreme Court ruling if they strike down this law? He was very, you could say coy, but I think he was very direct in the way. He did not answer that question because he does not want to say, because it's going to be very, very controversial. So this is from the Times of London. Military reservists no-show protests against Netanyahu leave Israel exposed. This is Israel Hayom on Friday, talking about the same thing, that this is a big problem, particularly at this time. Tehran has come out in the last couple days and says it has tech for a supersonic cruise missile. But look at how some people in Israel are viewing this. This comes from Haaretz newspaper. This is editorial a couple months ago, I think in April, about the protests and who's driving the water cannon to control the protest. This is because we have intervened, our government, the United States government has intervened in the Israeli internal politics. And so to the left, they view Biden as driving the water cannon to get rid of these people who are trying to do judicial reform. Very telling the way they do these editorial cartoons. This is another one from the other day. This is the Chief Justice or President of the Israeli Supreme Court who's using a water cannon to get rid of the Orthodox Party members. Look, reasonableness is a test used everywhere. It's not always easy to interpret. Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution says that the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against what? Unreasonable searches and seizures. And what happened was about 10 years ago, there was a case called Golden Valley. And in Golden Valley, the courts sort of reinterpreted what's reasonable under the Fourth Amendment. And they said it used to be like you would have files at your house, papers at your house, right? That's how you stored your financial documents. But what happened, 15, 20 years ago, everybody started storing things digitally. And as an attorney, I know this because the growth of digitally available information that people had, is amazing. And what the courts said, well, if you share that with somebody else, if you store it on a server someplace, or you exchange it by email, you've lost your right of expectation of privacy in those particular documents. And so the reasonableness thing that was in the Fourth Amendment wasn't reinterpreted to match the reality of modern society. It just essentially disappeared. And this is the problem with the reasonable test, is that it's very malleable and people use it. So that's a problem. And then finally, this is another thing that you're seeing, is there's a provision that, the Trump's been indicted, and now he's being charged with the incident that happened in the weeks leading up to Biden's inauguration. And there are conservative scholars at the Federalist that are saying in one of the post-Civil War amendments, the 14th Amendment, doesn't allow somebody to serve in office if they've been engaged in an insurrection against the United States. And I saw Alan Dershowitz, who's a man of the left, who doesn't even like Trump, said, this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. They're misinterpreting this. This is a travesty. And these are people supposedly on the conservative side of the ledger who are doing this. We are in a preview of coming attractions. We are in for a period of disruption and chaos. Just get ready for it, because it's coming. It's not going to change anytime soon. So get ready for it. Understand the times in which we live. Be wise as serpents, harmless as doves, okay? So let's pray, and we'll get out of here. Lord, thank you so much for the picture that you painted for us of the end times, and we pray that you will help us to understand the details as those become more apparent. We pray that you'll give us opportunities to share the gospel with those around us, because we do live at a time where people really need to hear the gospel that have not heard it or have not made a decision, have not repented and accepted the Lord as their Savior, that this is a very, very critical time for them. Give us the ability to guide conversations like this, and bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.